Our connection this hour was made last July when the Eastman School of Music welcomed a new dean, only the 8th dean in 100 years of the School of Music and the first woman to hold that position. Kate Sheeran is an alumna of the Eastman School. She most recently had been executive director of the Kaufman Music Center in New York City, and she was hired by Eastman to succeed Jamel Rossi. Previously, Sheeran served as provost and dean of the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. She comes to Eastman with a desire to see, as she puts it, more joy in music, joy in the students as they pursue their careers. She's a professional horn player herself, but it's also a time of uncertainty in the arts, from questions about funding to a federal government actively trying to roll back diversity initiatives on many campuses. Our conversation is the first one with the new, it's not new after about 9 months, but to us it's new. Kate Sheeran is the dean of the Eastman School of Music at the University of Rochester, the Joan and Martin Messinger dean, we should say. Welcome. Thank you for making time for the program.
Thanks for having me, Evan. Happy to be here.
And you are, as we say, an alumna, graduated in 2002, 1998 to 2002. What was the best time of that 4 or 5 years for you there?
Oh man, hard to pick just one moment. There's moments in terms of the relationships I built that have really turned into lifelong friendships, and I've met mentors that have been with me my whole life since that point. And I can think of lots of musical moments that stick out. But I was asked that question last year when I was thinking about this job. What's the thing that sticks with me most about my time at Eastman? And without question, it was the human connections that were built there and continue to flourish for me that were built at Eastman.
What was the moment when you were a student at Eastman where you realized, I'm going to be the dean of this place?
It didn't happen. I think it was a few years later. It might have been last year was the first time I ever thought that.
Now, you're from where originally?
I grew up in a tiny town in Vermont.
And so you come to Eastman, and your career takes you to a number of places. But it really was last year was the first time it kind of occurred to you that you could end up back in Rochester?
Well, all of these things in any field, but specifically in music, some of these positions are fairly singular, right? So I can name the times when I thought, maybe leadership is something that's for me, or my heart is pulling me towards education in addition to performance. I can think of all those moments, but the stars sort of have to align for you to be qualified and ready at the moment, the position. So it wouldn't have been right for me to think of any specific singular position, I think, at any point.
Has it, over the last 8-9 months, gone from being sort of surreal to be back to feeling like, okay, this is home, I'm in a rhythm here?
Yeah, although it's a healthy mix. I still have those surreal moments, especially I have a lot of friends who are alumni who've taken this opportunity to come back and visit this year, which is really fun for me. Some of them will come over and visit their friends and colleagues and former teachers at Eastman, but I see repeatedly them walk into Kodak Hall at Eastman Theater or Kilburn Hall and get that, your breath taken away, feeling that I had a lot last July and have when I see our students this year, but it's getting to be more routine for me.
So what is your first memory of music of your life? Go back to your childhood. What's the first youngest memory of music?
Well, my mom always sang with us a lot. I have a very large extended family. My grandfather was always playing the piano. So I'm a sucker for a sing-along, and that definitely comes from those. There's pictures of me with, my grandfather playing and all of us singing around him. So I think probably is from that time or from, those are the things that stick out to me at first.
Do you remember what you used to sing?
Oh, well, my grandfather was, he was first generation American. His family came from Ireland, and he grew up in deep Brooklyn, and he had this thick Brooklyn accent, and he was an FBI agent. But he played show tunes and standards and things like that. So I learned a lot of that repertoire that way.
Did you have a family that said, well, come hell or high water, you're taking an instrument, you're learning instruments, you're going to lessons? No. Did that happen at home?
No, not really. I think we all had lessons at some point, and we had, even in our small town in Vermont, had the opportunity to play an instrument. So I took piano lessons. They didn't really stick. I'm not a great pianist. But when I got to French horn, it sort of stuck. And my parents let me try a lot of different things. But eventually, the other activities sort of peeled off and music pushed through.
So my son, you could try to get him into piano. He ends up in drums. His best buddy, piano, ends up in guitar.
Uh-huh.
How did you end up in horn?
It's a combination of things. I had an elementary school music teacher that I adored, and she needed French horns in the band. And I had pretty good pitch because we had sung a lot at home, and I'd taken music class. And the partials on the horn, the mechanics of it are that if you can't hear it, if you can't hear that note, you have a really hard time playing it. So she said, "Hey, you have a pretty good ear. Why don't you try this?" And the teacher, I liked her so much. I said yes. And luckily, my mom sought out opportunities and teachers for me. For years after that kind of kept me on that path.
No, I mean, that's the story that a lot of people who end up in professional careers or pursuing degrees in music have, which is a lot of people in that category will be able to point to a mentor or a teacher, private lessons. Is it part of your vision to say, we don't have a perfectly egalitarian world, but we've got to get more people into this who their family may not be able to afford a private teacher, and we've got to find ways to reach and connect with people?
Yes. It is part of what it drives me every day. It's part of what gets me up and gets me to work every day, is that I just believe in music education for everyone as much as possible. And I've seen the fruits of that in so many different ways. Of course, with our college students, but we have close to 2,000 students at Eastman Community Music School, as young as 2 up to senior citizens. In my last role at Kaufman, we had a public school. And the academic stats spoke to the power of music education. If you give students more music, everything rises: academics, college acceptance rate, all of that.
Well, our colleague at WXXI Classical 91.5, Steve Johnson, and some of the wonderful colleagues in production in this building have put together In the Key of Z, which is we've really been enjoying. Yes. You're nodding. I hope you've been enjoying it,
I
too.
have, and we had some community music school students on.
Absolutely. So I'm not going to do a full Key of Z style interview, but I'm curious to know for you.
Yeah.
I mean, one composer, Desert Island. Who is it?
Oh, this is the hardest question. We actually were I was having a lunch with some colleagues, and I got asked this question. I don't know. It's probably. It depends on the day. It could be classical music. It could be, Brahms symphonies or Brahms chamber music. It could be Joni Mitchell's Blue. One disc is hard. It might be some of my friends' music. If I were alone on a desert island, I might want music written and performed by my friends as a comfort. So that's a tough question.
And if it has to be from the sort of the classical era, who's the top? Who's the top of your mountain?
Oh, I can't even begin to answer. I can't.
You can't dodge that. You've barely been here 10 minutes.
It's like someone saying, "How about that concert last week?" to me. Well, I probably went to 10 concerts last week, right? How do I choose?
I'm going to let you get away with dodging that. Okay, fair enough. The horn, though, as an instrument, how does it rank? I mean, how should people pursue horn? What makes you convince them this is a beautiful instrument, this is the road you should be going down?
What is a beautiful instrument? I mean, the lines we get to play, and some of the music that's written for horn is beautiful. I think but someone should only play it if they want to. I've seen lots of students be pushed towards one instrument when they wanted another. I would never do that. I would never advise that. So if your son is gravitating towards drums, let him. But piano will serve him well, in addition. I'd say for horn, I joke, but it's true that it teaches you to be both humble and bold, because you might miss a note, but you got to go for it, or you're definitely not going to get it. And there's a lot of parallels with leadership gigs and playing horn that way.
What's better, administering, managing, or teaching horn? Because you're still teaching some.
I'm not teaching now currently.
Oh, you're not? Okay.
I have, yeah. My appointment is in horn, but I'm not. We have a wonderful horn professor, and I know that firsthand, Peter Kiro, because he was my horn professor.
I didn't mean to supplant anybody.
No. But it's fun for me because Peter Kiro was my horn professor, and he is still the horn professor at Eastman. So that's been fun.
Yeah, talk about surreal.
Yeah. Well, this past year I got to present him with his alumni medallion at Alumni Weekend, and he looked at me and said, "Well, here's a moment I never imagined," right? And I felt that way too. Now I'm forgetting what your original question was.
Well, let's move in a better direction.
Okay.
Then, because I derailed all of that.
That's okay. That's okay.
Can I stand, or can I at least clap between movements?
Oh, I heard this on a show recently that you did, and your colleagues said, which is true, that's sort of an advent of the recording of doing live
That was
recordings and
news
things
to
like
me.
that.
I did not
Yeah.
know that history.
The tradition has become that there are certain pieces where people clap in between movements. But anytime someone is listening to music and is happy and expresses that happiness, I'm happy. I don't. I think it's fine. It would be interesting if the trend shifts back. It's not the trend, but performers on stage are always happy if the audience is happy and expressing that.
So you think if that became more the norm, it's going to take a few brave souls to do it?
I've accidentally clapped between movements. Sometimes you don't exactly know, and I think sometimes maybe because I go to so many concerts, I think, oh, I got this one. I'm a little overconfident, and it's okay. Nobody minds.
Are you sure? Because there's this idea that the whole hall is going to turn to you like, who invited this person?
Well, it's better than being the person who walks out or falls asleep or
much better.
Yeah. So. Why not?
Okay. Well, we'll see in the future if that trend can change. And I want to thank my colleague Steve Johnson for bringing a little bit of that history, because I would have thought that was true from the beginning, and it was not true. There used to be all kinds of applause, and I should have known that, because we talked about the story about how before recorded music, not only was there applause, but there are times where audiences would ask entire orchestras to redo a movement because they don't know when the next time they get to hear it is. So I'm fine for anything that makes it less stuffy. How's that?
Yeah, absolutely. And later this spring, we have the Eastman Philharmonia performing the epic Stravinsky piece, Rite of Spring. And there are all kinds of stories about when Rite of Spring was premiered, and there were people, up in arms about it because it was so different. But that's what art should do. We should react, and it should push us to think different things.
You did an interview with Spectrum News, and you gave this answer that at first I was like, oh, that's so cheesy. But then I was like, then I was thinking about it. I'm like, no, there's a lot of beauty in this answer. You talked about your favorite place on campus is a set of marble stairs. What is it? Why?
So if you walk in Lowry Hall, which is the main hall at Eastman, first of all, it's an inspiring space in and of itself. But there's a grand staircase that goes up, and this is a little bit true as you go up. But the steps down really to the basement where students store their lockers have you can feel the grooves in the marble. You feel the footsteps of everybody who's stepped in those steps. And I always used to think about it when I was a student, because you think of, wow, all the musicians who've been here and all the faculty and students. And now I think about our students stepping into those steps and adding their footsteps and making sure we're taking care of the school for the future.
You said something else to Spectrum I thought was interesting. You said one of the best things about our art form is that we can reflect the world around us.
Absolutely.
It's always more interesting when there are more voices in the choir. So I want to ask you, as the first woman who has been a dean of the Eastman School ever, only 8 deans in 100 years and the first woman, do you get tired of hearing that, or is that a point of pride for you?
I mean, to be dean of the Eastman School is a point of pride for me, for sure. But I feel the I wouldn't say weight, but I feel the responsibility of that, just being dean. I think when I think about my role as a woman in that, it's about who comes after me and who else can see themselves as a dean because they saw somebody different in that role. And that's true throughout our field, throughout any field. But in music, there's the old adage, if you can't see it, you can't be it. Of course, that's not exactly true, because we can all think of people who have been first in their field. But I've seen it repeatedly with students that when they see someone who has a similar background, that they too can imagine themselves there.
We've talked in the last couple of months to officers, administrators at higher ed campuses across our region, and they are pretty quickly trying to adapt to some of what we're seeing come out of Washington, the challenge to DEI, diversity initiatives, et cetera. In general, are you someone who thinks it's valuable to be intentional about setting the idea of we need take any number of initiatives, DEI initiatives, efforts to outreach in different places, creating a more representative campus? I mean, is that still part of the goal that you have?
Absolutely, and our mission hasn't changed. It's right in our mission statement. For the university and for Eastman specifically, there's a line in our mission statement that is about making a musical community that is rich in cultural, social, and intellectual diversity. And that makes everybody better. More perspectives make things more interesting. We have students from all over the world at Eastman. We want to learn from them as much as we're teaching them while they're there, and we want them to feel great being there. And it's interesting in the field of music specifically that the journey to become a musician is so long. So really, if we're talking about anything we want to change in the field, even for professional musicians, we also have to be talking about 5-year-olds and opportunities and school music programs and how we're showing the pathway and building the pathway. And I think that's a lot of our responsibility as an institution in music.
I've talked to leaders in local government, town governments, counties, administrators in higher ed, and there's this ongoing conversation about, not everybody has a DEI officer, a DEI department. There's questions about whether they can or should continue those. Does Eastman have that? DEI department?
We have the George Walker Center, which is one of the ways that we engage students, and that's really the home for a lot of our student activities in coordination with Student Life. But a lot of our student-led initiatives, we have a number of affinity groups, everything from a new one called Empower Her about lifting up women in music to ELSA, which, if I get the acronym right, is Eastman Latino Hispanic Students Association or Black Students Union. If I try to list them all, I'll miss somebody. But these are all student initiatives, and they're for students to hang out with and learn with and perform with as students like them, but also for them to interact with the rest of our community and show us what's important to them.
So you're not scaling back on any of that?
Our mission has not changed. Of course, we are in touch with everybody, like all schools at the university and all schools across the country, that we're making sure that we're following what's happening with government. Of course, we're in touch with our government relations and other offices at the university to make sure we're monitoring the regulatory environment. But our work continues, and our work is more interesting with more and different perspectives.
What about festivals, events that are intentional about celebrating diversity, like Gateways? Are they going to continue and be supported?
Gateways, part of my role is to be ex officio on certain boards, and Gateways is one of them. And I was just having a conversation with Alex Lang, who is the president and artistic director. And Gateways isn't a diversity initiative. Gateways is specifically to uplift Black classical musicians. And so it just like, any initiative that would celebrate any part of a specific culture. And so Gateways intends to continue its mission. And their festival's coming up end of April. Lots of great concerts.
Are you worried about any loss of, and again, I'm not inside the books, or I don't understand how everything gets funded. That's not my job. But is there a concern that what's happening in the federal government could impact funding, opportunity, grants, et cetera, in the future?
Yes. And I think all kinds of changes affect funding for us, right? And certainly anything that affects the university and at a primarily research university, that is a very real issue right now that we're all dealing with. In the arts, federal funding tends to be a smaller amount anyway, but indirectly we're worried about it. And also, funding that has to be redirected to other sources if there's funding changes could affect us.
And set aside what's happening with this particular administration in general, how is Eastman doing with its goals, its missions, its fundraising? How healthy are the finances?
So we have lots of ways we measure, the health of the school. One of them is admissions, and our admissions are very healthy. We had a pretty record year last year, and we're holding steady. This is the time. Offers just went out, so we'll know soon how many students enroll. Generally, we're healthy financially, but I'm playing for the home team here, so I always think we can do better. And I want to make sure we have more and more resources, especially for scholarship for students, because, as I said earlier, I just want as many people to have this education as they can, and for finances not to be a barrier.
I've brought this up a number of times. Listeners have heard me say to organizations that are facing similar situations where you don't know if there's going to be cuts, sometimes you're even more reliant on a community and philanthropy.
That's right.
Have you found more doors opening because people perceive things getting tighter and more difficult, or is it more difficult to find donors, bigger donors, et cetera?
I think it's hard for me to tell 9 months in, because it takes a while to understand that. I can give a comparison. In my last role when I was at Kaufman, I was about a year in when COVID hit. And that was certainly a challenge for arts organizations, for every organization, but a lot of resources went, for very good reason, to healthcare and things like that first. And so the arts were later on to receive funding, and we didn't know it was going to happen. But what I noticed during that time, and I hope is always the case, is that people kind of thought, what would life be like without this place, without what they do, without, the education they give or the art they provide. And you saw a lot of people stepping up to help support the places they love. So if it is a great time to do that, I know the same is true in public radio, all kinds of things. But for people to really think, what provides joy or solace or the organizations that they really love, we could always use the help.
Do you have a philosophy of leadership? You've been in a number of places now. I get kind of geeky trying to think about how people lead because there's different leadership styles. And now here you are at Eastman. You're coming from Kaufman. You've been in San Francisco. You've done a lot of leading. What's your theory of leadership?
I don't know. I don't know that I have because I'm a musician, it's going to sound cheesy, but I relate a lot of things to music, and how I've learned music is sort of how I've learned a lot about life. And you can do sort of the conductor and orchestra style, or you could do chamber music style where you're all working on something together. And I've gotten further chamber music style where you're rallying people around shared goals and opportunities and working as a team to move forward. So that tends to be my approach. Although there's a lot of people to learn both at Eastman and throughout the University of Rochester. And so I'm still getting to put those groups in place and look forward to getting us moving forward together.
What has changed in Rochester the most in that 22-year gap when you left and then you came back as dean?
Well, it's hard to say. When I was a student, I didn't leave the 2 blocks between on Gibbs Street very often.
Was Java's there?
Java's was very much there. Someone said to me, "Oh yeah, I know Rochester. There's a place you should really check out. It's called Java's." And I said, "Java's is where I first tasted coffee." So, Java's, but also Java's. I think it's the same ownership with Good Luck and Lucky's, and there's a lot. I would say there's a lot of great restaurants. But I had never been to the Finger Lakes. I'd never been anywhere in this area because I was so focused
in
as
the
an
Eastman
undergraduate.
World.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think my knowledge of the university and the opportunity we have to be part of the university is part of what drew me back. Because I've been at schools within universities, but also independent schools and organizations. And the questions we can ask and answer as a music school within a research university are amazing. And that's part of what makes me feel lucky to be here this time.
Talking to Kate Sheeran, who is the dean of the Eastman School of Music at the University of Rochester, and been here for the better part of a year. It hasn't been a year. It'll be in July. It'll be 1 year for Dean Sheeran since taking over the position. Jamal Rossi, the previous dean, and Kate is just the 8th dean in 100 years. So I suspect that means you expect to be in this position for a while, given the history.
I hope so, yes.
Yeah. So this is a community you want to stay in for a while.
Absolutely, yeah. I lived in New York City, with the exception of 3 years in San Francisco. I lived in New York City for the better part of the, past 2 decades, right? And I hadn't necessarily expected to move, but Rochester's a great place to be. It's such a music town. There's a lot of support for music here, but there's a lot of great culture here. We love going to, Memorial Art Gallery and local theater and different performances when we can. So I'm very happy to be here.
Biggest advantage being in Rochester vis-a-vis New York City?
Oh, well, okay. I can have a personal and professional answer
Sure.
to that. Professionally, so I love New York. I love the schools, but it's sort of a singular environment, right? In that the amount of opportunities, the amount of things that are happening, things like that, it's sort of hard to cut through. In Rochester, you have a breadth of wonderful performing arts organizations. You have everything at the university. But Eastman, I think by sheer number of events, we're probably the largest performing arts center in Rochester. And that comes with opportunity and responsibility. And, the ways we show students how you interact with your city and your community and your home are important because of where we are in Rochester and what we do here. But that's because they can take that all over the world. And I think that's a little bit more repeatable in a place like Rochester than some of the other cities.
What do you wish Rochester has that New York City has?
Oh, let's see. I used to live in Hell's Kitchen, and so I could grab a last-minute ticket to walk over to Broadway, and we certainly have that here. But I'd need to take advantage of it more often. I think I miss seeing friends, specific people, but luckily they come to visit a lot. There are some convenience things, and I had to adjust to things not being open all the time. On Mondays, I got tripped up that, I need to find out what are the restaurants that are open on Mondays. So stuff like that. But I get back, I'll be in the city for a conference at the end of this week, and sometimes we go down and back in a day for work. So it's not so far.
We had a conversation a couple years ago how post-pandemic, everything is closed pretty early. You want to go out late in this town? There's not a lot of options there.
That's true.
And in New York City, you can probably go at almost any hour.
Yeah.
Not any hour, but you can go a lot of options there.
And for musicians, even when I lived in San Francisco, it was an adjustment from New York because we're calibrated to going to dinner after concerts. And so it's sometimes a challenge to figure out where that can happen.
After we take our only break of the hour, we're going to come back with the Dean of the Eastman School of Music at the University of Rochester. And we're going to talk to Kate Sheeran about some of how Kate sees maybe the role of the students, but even the opportunity for students to impact the world. That's part of what the Dean was talking to students about, not only finding joy, but seeing the role that they have to creates impact and value in communities. We're going to talk about that. And this is a school that has a great reputation, obviously, but it's such a competitive music world, and there's not a ton of spots. And I want to kind of talk about what it means to bring really talented students in and help them prepare for a world where it matters, but it doesn't matter if they're in the top spot because they can impact the world in all these different ways. So the Dean is joining us for the first time on Connections, and we'll come right back with this conversation. This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. I'm glad to be joined for the first time on this program by the Dean of the Eastman School of Music, Kate Sheeran, who came back to Rochester, was a student at Eastman, left in 2002, graduated in 2002, and then came back as the Dean in the summer of 2024. And this is Dean Sheeran's first opportunity to sit down with us on Connections. Now, recently here in Rochester, we had a chance to hear from star conductor Leonard Slatkin. He was in town last week, and he told my colleagues, Brenda Tremblay, Mona Segatola-Slami, that Eastman was doing well to create smart and realistic expectations for students. And I want to listen to some of what conductor Leonard Slatkin said about that.
I love seeing in this country, as I go around and do these, the places where the education system is working and the places where it's not. We have several universities, even music schools, where we're just not doing the right job. Eastman is. It is doing exactly what it needs to do. It's got a wonderful faculty. It's got a great administration. And it realizes what its place is. It's not going to churn out all the top soloists in the world, not all the top singers. It knows that there are varying degrees. So there's a reality check that occurs in Eastman that you don't see in as many schools as you should.
What do you make of that?
Well, I'm glad he thinks we're doing the right things. Thank you, Maestro. I hadn't heard that clip before, and that was a phenomenal concert. I'd be happy to tell you more about it. My experience as an alumna, and my experience, especially this year, traveling the world, I've been to multiple countries and all over this country, meeting with alumni, is we have great, hardworking musicians who are successful in their chosen field that come out of Eastman. And that's throughout the field. So, yes, we have students who go on to be soloists and opera stars. We have students who take top spots in the top orchestras and opera companies. But we have K-12 teachers and people running schools and institutions and creating music software and becoming recording engineers and composers who are working throughout the industry. So often we think of the star names that come from Eastman, and those are important too. But I love telling the stories of people who've built organizations that have changed communities or made the next advancement in technology. So perhaps that's what he's talking about. The breadth of training that happens at Eastman prepares you for lots of different things.
Anything else you want to say about Slatkin's visit?
The concert was amazing. I mean, the students, Leonard Slatkin, has been the music director in St. Louis Symphony, Detroit Symphony for many years, BBC Symphony. He's one of the great American conductors. So you can imagine our students being excited to perform with him. But that was a really interesting concert because he did Ives Variations on America. Then he did a performance of a fairly new concerto by Jeff Beal, also an alum. Violin concerto, really cool piece with another Eastman alum, the wonderful Kelly Hall Tompkins as soloist, and then they did Shostakovich 11. And it was a beautiful concert from start to finish, but when that finished, the amount of applause in the hall, mostly from the students' peers, is one of the things that there's just nothing like it. It's sort of our version of a pep rally, right, to have that much cheering. But it went on for 4 bows, and then I went across the street to grab my bag and walk back through the school, and it was like the building was erupting with cheers in the hallways. So if you want to know if there's a future for music, come to Gibb Street. It's there every day.
That's a great story. And these students, do you think that they have that perspective that you talk about where there's these quote unquote star slots, but there's opportunities to impact the world in countless ways? Do you think that perspective is held on campus?
I think so. Our students are so focused on specifically what they're there to do. I don't know how many have time to think about exactly where they'll end up, and I think that's healthy. I also think in the 20th century in music, and specifically in classical music education, we got overly specific. I'm going for that position in orchestra, or I need to be a trombonist in that big band or thing. That's not really how music works. We all do some of everything. Even if you do have primarily one job, you end up doing lots of things. It was like that for Bach, he didn't do one thing. And so I think this fluidity is always helpful.
Well, you said that you didn't expect to be the dean when you were a student. What did you expect to be when you were a student?
So when I was a performance major, both here and for my graduate school, for my master's degree at Yale. And I knew I would perform at some point, but I took some classes in music education, music teaching and learning is what we call it now. It was also the start of the Arts Leadership Program, which has grown into our Institute for Music Leadership. So it started sparking different things for me about maybe I do have a knack for, I don't know whether I would have said leadership, but something where I'm helping to make things better. And I did internships here, Young Audiences Rochester, which was here. I learned how to write teachers' manuals, and I learned about grant writing and things like that. So those seeds were there, and it's sort of a funny, twisty, turny path about what happened after graduate school and kind of how I ended up taking this on. But after I got out of school, I started doing a combination between teaching and performing and administration or helping things work, and it went from there.
One thing that I think probably affecting students more now than when I was in school, and you and I are around the same age, is that everything feels politicized more than it ever has. And students now who are at Eastman are aware that there are debates in the arts about what gets funded and why. They see the President of the United States put himself on the Kennedy Center board, immediately seek to change the programming. There was a recent piece in The Atlantic about some of the debate that has happened among those who were still on the Kennedy schedule. Some canceled their shows. Others have very explicitly said, I'm staying here and I'm performing until they tell me I can't, because I think that representation really matters here. Students are seeing all of that.
Absolutely.
First of all, what do you make of what's going on at Kennedy?
It's tough. I have many friends who work there and who perform in administration, but also who perform in the National Symphony and Washington National Opera. So my first thoughts go to them and making sure that I hope that they can do their work and stick to their mission. I think it's too early to know what exactly is going to happen there. It's difficult. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I think none of us know what to make of it.
You think it's appropriate for the president to put himself on that board?
I don't think it's for me to say. They have a particular public-private mission, but I know the board for many years has, and since the history of the Kennedy Center has been bipartisan, and that makes good sense.
Well, I mean, and this is where the White House seems to be keying in on just about what everybody's doing in every initiative. I mean, back in 2020. The Eastman created the Eastman Action Commission for Racial Justice, which issued its final report of recommendations in the fall of 2020. So how is the timeline going from that? I mean, is that complicated about what's happening? Is that still sort of an active document that Eastman is working from?
There's a lot of things in that, we're with any strategic planning document, of which that is one, right? That lays out a plan. We're constantly checking in with how are we doing with goals, and that continues. None of those things are to exclude people; they're to include people.
That distinction probably I'm sure it matters a lot. Last week on this program, we talked to a couple people who are planning upcoming conferences focused on women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses.
Yes.
And they said, maybe we need to be even more clear that this is not about saying, here's who's not allowed to apply.
That's right.
Here's who's not going to be considered. But to say, we think there are qualified people of every background.
That's right.
And historically, they haven't always even been aware that there's an opportunity.
That's right.
So we want them to know there's an opportunity. We want them in the consideration.
Absolutely.
Is that a good description?
Yes, thank you. And we need everybody's help to do it. And I think that's the thing. It will take all of us to help swing the pendulum to where it needs to go.
Do your students want you to be political? Do they want the administration to take stances?
We're not political. We're
right.
Yeah.
And you almost can't be, right? But
Yeah.
But do the students have that expectation now that there's so much weight on everything?
I think of the things that we were trying to process when I was a student, and the access to information we had now, it's nothing like students have with constant information. So yeah, they're finding every way to process information and think about different things.
Curious to know what the relationship is between the downtown campus and the river campus. Has that changed? What ways would you say they're connected or distinct?
Yeah, geographically, obviously, we're separate, but I think that is changing. Where we're the Eastman campus, but we're also the downtown campus for the university, and increasingly that includes Memorial Art Gallery and additional medical buildings. And we're really thinking about how we use all three campuses: medical, river campus, and downtown campus, and how they interact. And that's some of my favorite work that we're doing, is how we collaborate with schools across the university.
Well, and certainly you talk about change. Artificial intelligence seems to be changing everything pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask you a few questions about that. First of all, AI in music. Is there any role for AI in creation of music?
Yes. I think if I said no, we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot, right? Sometimes classical music especially has run away from new technology, and what ends up happening is we have to embrace it in one way or another eventually. So the more we can harness the power of what actually works, and not all of it works, and some of it's scary, but some of it's not, the more we can work with colleagues to examine everything about AI, both in terms of usage, in terms of ethics, in terms of predicting the future. We have the opportunity to do that at the University of Rochester in a way a freestanding music school doesn't, and that's what we're starting to do now.
So when it comes to the integrity of the creation, though,
mm-hmm.
and frankly, the jobs of the future being there for human beings,
mm-hmm.
that's what scares me a lot about the arts.
Mm-hmm.
I think about the way that we can use machines ostensibly to make our lives easier. I mean, a lot of the people who are creating this tech will say, well, we're just simplifying your lives and we're taking the mundane tasks out. Well, creating art is not a mundane task.
Right. And, there's a meme that's something like, can't we get AI to do the laundry and cook dinner so that I can,
write
sing
the
songs
poetry
and
sing the
dance?
songs. Exactly. Like, how do we get this backwards?
Right.
But so if I were a student now, my concern would be, what does that mean for me? Does that mean that there will be fewer jobs, that there will be a more narrow public focus on actual humans creating the art? Are we heading in a dangerous direction there?
I think, again, too soon to tell, but I think we need to work with researchers who are deep into these issues and thinking about these issues together. But I'll give you another example. I used a couple COVID examples, but I did a lot of work I'm really proud of during that time in difficult circumstances. But one of the things that we all worried about, those of us who run music schools and arts organizations and presenting, was that everything was streamed, right? And we all worried that people weren't going to come back, that the halls weren't going to be full again. But I saw over and over when we started to have different kinds of performances, people came out. Like the human experience requires us to be together, and there's nothing. I have to believe it for my job, but I really believe it with every fiber of my being that there's nothing like being live and hearing music. So I can't imagine. It's been around since the beginning of time. I can't imagine it's going away. But yeah, jobs are going to change. The ways that film scoring or sound design or all these things happen, they'll change, and we have to figure out ways to help guide that conversation instead of being a victim of it.
So I'm cheering on everything you're saying internally. But of course you have to say that people are coming back. And they are coming back. I mean, It's not like there's nobody going to movies, they're going to the Little Theater, going to Eastman, whatever.
Yep.
But I wear sweatpants a lot more than I used to before
Yeah.
the pandemic.
Okay. Fair enough.
There are plenty of days where I get back, I'm like, I don't want to leave the house again.
But are you consuming more media or more art? Similar amounts?
I think I go to less in-person performance, and I don't like that about
Yep.
me. I don't know for a fact. I'm guessing.
Yep.
I don't like. It's not like I go to none.
Yeah.
But I don't like I don't like if it's 10% less.
Right.
Because what connects us is a human experience.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we just give up and stream everything from our homes,
Right.
and the more we let the machines do it,
Mm-hmm.
we are risking something that's hard to articulate, but I think very real.
That's true. And I don't think the answer is somewhere in between, right? It's not everybody's coming to concert halls like we always have, but not everything is moving to machines. It's somewhere in between. And so what is the hybrid? How do we embrace technology? How do we move the art form forward? How do we bring music to an increasing amount of places, so it's not just somebody buying a ticket and going to a concert hall. And that takes community and supporters, and the work I've been able to do in other places to bring music outside of concert halls has been really meaningful. But it takes businesses and government and performing arts centers all working together.
Well, I mean, my bias will probably come out when we talk about it soon on this program, but we are going to talk about proposals to get cell phones and screens out of K through 12. Now, higher ed's a wholly different thing, and I get that. And in many ways, screens probably enhance what students can do and can learn. But Governor Hochul has a bell-to-bell proposal to get rid of phones in schools. We've seen Arkansas do this. We've seen red states and blue states. Do you want to see less technology in students' hands when they're learning?
Well, in my experience in K to 12, at Kaufman Music Center, one of the schools is called Special Music School. It's a public-private school, and they at the high school they have for many years, and they do collect cell phones at the beginning of the day and give them back at the end of the day. Is it that? Is it all the music? Whatever that makes the school successful? But I don't think it's a coincidence that it has led to good results. You know, it's interesting, when I got back to Eastman last summer, everybody was talking about putting Wi-Fi in the annex. Now, the annex, if you haven't been there, is our practice building, which I also say is a great naming opportunity, the annex, right? We could look for a new name, but it's always been called the annex. But we have an affinity for it, those of us who went to school there. But it's just floors and floors of practice rooms. Now, you'd think, why do you need Wi-Fi in the annex? Well, because students are using iPads instead of printed music. And, you're safer if you have access to your phone and all these things. So, there are very practical reasons that we need the technology, and that it helps us on a day-to-day basis as musicians.
Yeah, I suppose. Do you have a Spotify playlist yourself? What
many.
app? So what app? Do you use
Oh,
Spotify?
yeah. I use Spotify. I use Apple Music. I use SoundCloud. I use, it depends on what I'm listening to.
So who's the pop star that I would see the most played on your lists?
Oh, I mean, there's been some Chapel Roan in rotation pretty
Oh, yeah,
heavily
there
lately.
you go.
She's great.
So, but this is what I've been thinking about, like with AI, and I think about if I were a student, what would make me nervous. We've talked about how Randy Travis had 35 years of music and then lost the ability to sing 10, 12 years ago because of medical conditions. And so his team took 35 years of music. They fed it into AI. You can see how technical I am. And AI created a song
Yep.
with what certainly sounds like his voice, what certainly sounds like the style. And his family was deeply moved, and his wife said, I feel like he's got his voice back. But now his fans are saying, well, that's a new Randy Travis song. And I'm like, no, it isn't.
Right.
I don't think it is.
Right.
So if they did that with Chaperone and they did like a Chaperone-like song, that's not a Chaperone song.
Agreed.
It's not, somebody out there has created a Beethoven or a Shostakovich, and that's not Shostakovich.
That's right.
That's AI approximating. But it's good at it, and it's only going to get better.
It's okay at it.
It's only going to get better.
That's true.
It's
That's
only going
true.
to get better.
I just went to a talk at the River Campus. At our colleagues in audio music engineering at the Hagem School for Engineering had a guest who actually is an Eastman alum who writes for commercials and all kinds of things. And she did a demo of how she uses different AI tools. Now, she uses them as tools in her process, and it might make for some things to be more efficient, but it still absolutely required her and many other musicians to move them forward. I know you're cynical about here, but it's my job to be optimistic. And if I think it's not going to be all one thing or the other, right? It's not going to be all machines, and it's not going to be all
I just don't want us to be apathetic to it.
Absolutely not.
That's the baseline.
Yeah, and I said this before, but it's part of what brought me back to Rochester, because we have researchers who are looking into these issues every day. And if we're working together, there's a really cool initiative at the university right now for proposals for transdisciplinary centers, and that's work across schools. And we have a great one that our faculty have put together, faculty across many disciplines, about the intersection of music and sound. And these are a lot of the issues that we could tackle together that we can't do alone.
One other question before I ask you to tell us what's coming up on your calendar that you want the
Yep.
community to know about. And sometimes when you have someone who comes in from out of town into a leadership position, you're trying to deal with issues that popped up before you got there.
That's right.
And one example that I've been reading about is Eastman student Rebecca Bryant Novak, who's written publicly about what she says is a culture of misogyny at Eastman. Her blog posts were published, and the incidents occurred before you took over as dean. But I wonder, have you read those? Have you been thinking about the accusations? Do you agree with that assessment of the culture? Do you think the culture is changing? What do you think?
I think our culture is good, and I can say that we are making sure that everybody who is in our school is safe and can thrive and can learn. And every a concern that anybody brings up, we look into, absolutely. But like every school, like every institution, we can continue to evolve and get better.
Have you read Rebecca's writing on this?
Some of it.
Okay. Let's turn to what you're looking forward to most now. And you said that technically it's the biggest performing arts center in the region because you always have something going on.
Yeah, it's close to 1,000 concerts, I think. And so on a day-to-day basis, there's probably 4 concerts every day, minimum. We're looking at student degree recitals, faculty artists. We're looking at large concerts. So for anyone local, the vast majority of what we do at Eastman is free and open to the public. And I know that free sometimes doesn't always feel welcoming if you've never been there before, but we want you to come. And if you see me or faculty or students, please talk to us. So those are things that are happening on Gibb Street. So one other, and I'll come back and tell you a few highlights, but
Sure.
We also, when I was a student, there was an initiative called Music for All, when all the groups went out one day and played all over town. And we brought it back this year. The faculty have done a great job with this, but it's all semester. So there's close to 70 groups that are playing in community centers and libraries, all kinds of places. So you might have music coming to you wherever you are, but if you're going to come to Eastman, I just want to flag that our spring opera theater production, Ina Damar, which is speaking of, culture that comes from all over the world, it's an opera by Osvaldo Golijov, Argentinian composer of Eastern European descent, about the story of Lorca during the Spanish Revolution. And it's in Spanish, but don't worry, there's English subtitles. We'll all be able to understand it. But there's lots of flamenco, both dancing and music in it. So that would be great to check out. One of my all-time favorites, I mentioned it before, is Rite of Spring. That's coming up with conductor Brad Lubman later this spring. But this is the time of year when a lot of our students are doing their degree recitals. And if you walk into anything that says student degree recital, you're going to see some of the best musicians before they embark on their professional career. So we hope everybody joins us.
How often do you get a chance to create music or at least play the horn yourself these days?
Oh, well, as I mentioned, this isn't the focus of my career.
No.
I played professionally for many years and was very happy to. But you're asking me on a fun week because I'm sneaking in the back of the Eastman Horn Choir for a concert on Thursday at 6:30 with Professor Peter Curao and also student conductors who are doing a great job, all kinds of music, 28 French horn players playing at once. That really, this might be the biggest horn choir or one of them in the country.
Do the students want to see you playing?
I hope so. They're nice to let me play with them now, but I think it humanizes me and reminds them that I'm one of. I was a student too. That I'm one of them.
Let me close with this here. I think part of the reason I think a job like yours is very difficult is really listening to the student body, trying to make sure their concerns are respected. I think the advocacy and activism on campuses is definitely different than it was probably when you and I were in college campuses, and the world's changed a lot.
Yep.
And there are days where I think, having a teenager, there's days where I think, you think you have it all figured out, and you don't. And then there are days where I think, thank God young people are using their voice.
Absolutely.
And so how do you balance making sure that you are hearing the concerns of students who are raising their voices?
Yeah.
While understanding that, they're evolving as people too.
Yeah, and this is when you should be trying things out and taking risks, and that's true musically. It's true in how we're thinking critically about things, how we're challenging leadership, whether it's at school or beyond. So that's healthy. It's part of a healthy culture, and the more we can engage with students about their concerns, the better environment we'll have.
Schumann or Schubert to close?
Schumann.
Yes, because you can take both.
Well, because he
you
wrote
can take
more
Robert
for
and
the
Clara.
horn. Yeah, there's both. Well, I like both, but yeah.
I want to thank you for making the time, and I want to say I know that the work must be very busy. I hope you make it a somewhat routine effort to pop in here. The door will always be open.
Yes.
And it's a great place for the community to hear you at length. Kate Sheeran is the Dean of the Eastman School of Music at the University of Rochester, although I have much more qualified colleagues down the hall in Classical 91.5 who also are phenomenal interviewers and people, and you've given your time to me, which is gracious of you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. That's Dean Kate Sheeran, the Joan and Martin Messinger Dean of the Eastman School of Music at the University of Rochester, just the 8th Dean in 100 years. From all of us at Connections, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching on the WXXI News YouTube channel. We are back with you tomorrow on member-supported public media.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.